Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to fill out the activities section of the Common App or similar applications. The activities section allows you to highlight some of the different things that you've been involved in during your high school career. So it's kind of like a digital resume. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that there is a limit to the number of entries that you can have. You're allowed to have up to 10. So you can have fewer than that, but you cannot exceed 10 entries. So we're going to talk about what that means later in the video because some students are going to want to know how to actually select their 10 if they have more than 10 entries. Now, another thing you need to be aware of is that there's going to be a drop down and you have to choose the correct category for your activity. So this is just your best judgment. Every once in a while, there might be an activity that seems to fall under two different categories. So you're going to need to select the one that you think is the best fit. Now, another thing that you're going to need to include would be the grade or grades that you were in when you participated in this activity, the timing. So this would be like during the school year or during a school break, perhaps. You also need to include information like how many hours per week and also how many weeks per year. So this is just to give the committee who's looking at your application an idea of the time commitment and that kind of thing. So if you don't know the exact number, it's okay to estimate, but make sure you're actually being realistic. There are also some character limits that you need to be aware of. So you have up to 50 characters to include your position or a leadership description and also the name of the organization. And then you have up to 150 characters to describe your involvement in that activity. It's important to know that as you start working on your Common App application, you don't have to do it all in one sitting. You can save it and come back to it if you need to. But one thing that has helped a lot of my students is actually trying to write out their activities on a separate doc. This allows them to play with the word count and the characters, and also it allows them to move things around and try to figure out the order that they want to put everything in. It also helps them kind of see everything all together on one page. That way they can figure out which activities are more of a priority. So you want to ask yourself, which activities have I been involved in the longest? Which activities have I been the most active in? Because you want to emphasize the things that you've been truly committed to as opposed to things that you just sort of did and then gave up on, or maybe weren't as active of a member. So what about those of you who have more than 10 activities on your list? How do you decide which activities make the cut? Well, one thing I would encourage you to think about is that you want your activities to show a complete portrait of who you are. So if you've already asked yourself which activities show the most dedication, leadership, and longevity, and you still haven't narrowed it down, then look at the activities that seem to be very similar. Let's say you're very interested in computer science and you have 4 separate activities that all speak to computer science. If they are not all equally as important, I might cut the least important of those activities in favor of something else that shows a different side of your personality because you don't want to appear to be one-dimensional. Passion is good, but you also want to show diverse interests if at all possible. Now, another thing that you're going to need to consider is that some colleges offer a supplemental essay where you actually get to write about your involvement in an extracurricular activity. So depending on the wording, it could be something that you included in your activity section, or it could be something that you left off your activity section. So think about that as you're planning this as well. One of the most difficult aspects of the activities section, at least for most students, is writing the description. And that's because students need to use active verbs to convey what they did in order to stay in that character count. So you want to make sure that you are selling yourself. Now, it might seem a little bit weird to use verbs like organized or orchestrated or engineered, but you're going to want to be precise to let them know exactly what you did. So if you look at this slide, there are 2 examples. The top example is really boring. Now, the bottom example is much more specific, and it's all because of the word choice. Here is a list of verbs that you can use to be more precise when you're writing your description. So these are all active verbs, and some of them have synonyms. That way you can vary your verb choice because like an essay, you don't want to use the same verb over and over again. So if you find that you're doing that, try to find a different verb to use instead. As you're filling out the activities section, I want you to take a second to read your descriptions and ask yourself, what does this reveal about me? And the reason is that sometimes students tend to get in comparison mode. So as they're filling out their activities section, they might think, well, I haven't been club president, or I wasn't team captain, I wasn't named drum major, I didn't have a lead in a school play, and they start to worry that their application is not going to stand out enough, and then self-doubt kind of creeps in. So one thing I want you to realize is that while leadership roles are good, there are other ways to be a leader, and there are other skills that you might want to emphasize. So perhaps you are a really organized person, or maybe you have really good communication skills. Maybe you're ambitious and dedicated. Those are all qualities that you could highlight in other ways, and you don't have to be the best at everything. You don't have to be the captain. You don't have to be the president. And if you are, that's great, and capitalize upon that. But if you're not, it doesn't mean that colleges won't be interested in you, and it also doesn't mean that you don't have anything to offer, because you do. So think about what your descriptions reveal about who you are and try to highlight the best version of yourself that you can. As you're working on your descriptions, there are some questions that you can actually ask yourself in order to make sure that you're not only being precise, but also to make sure that you're using as many of the available characters as possible. So even though you have a limited amount of characters to use, you want to make sure that you take advantage of the ones that you have. So one thing you're going to want to be very clear about is, what exactly did you do? You don't want to assume that the person reading your application is going to know. Because for instance, your involvement in Key Club might be very different than your best friend's involvement in Key Club. Or your involvement could be very different than somebody in another state. So you want to be very specific about what it is that you did. Remember, it's your application. Now you also want to ask yourself questions like, was there a certain problem that I tried to solve? Did I gain any knowledge or skills? How did I have an impact in this activity? Things like that. Those are all things that you can highlight in your description. So let's talk about other ways to maximize your character count and to add specifics as well. Keep in mind that there's going to be the title and the description, and those are separate things with separate character counts. So you can actually include your role, like let's say you're captain or team leader, something like that, and the organization name in the title as opposed to the description. That way you have more room in the description to actually explain what it is that you did. Now, as far as adding more specifics, let's say that you were in charge of a fundraiser. How much money did you actually raise? You can include that information in the specifics. Or let's say that you were one of only a few students selected for something. Include that as well, because that shows that it was competitive. Now, what if you feel like you don't have enough activities? Well, one thing to do is to talk to a family member or a friend and have them help you brainstorm. Maybe you've forgotten something. Also, one thing to do might be to ask yourself, is there a way that I can expand on any of the existing activities that I'm already in? You don't want to necessarily try to pad your resume in your senior year. It's going to look a little bit suspicious if all of a sudden you started 5 activities in the fall of your senior year. So if you're going to add something, make sure it's something that you're truly passionate about, and make sure it's something that you can actually be devoted to. Another concern that students might have is because of COVID-19, there might be some gaps in your activity section, either from spring of 2020 or possibly even this fall. So it's important to remember that admissions counselors know that there are going to be gaps. So ask yourself if there are other ways that you can fill in these gaps. Maybe you can't do the activity the way you intended, but is there something else that you can do to demonstrate leadership or commitment? Also, maybe you took up an activity during this time. Talk to your guidance counselor and ask him or her if that would be something good to include in your activity section as well. If you guys found this video valuable, please do me a huge favor and give the video a thumbs up. Also, if you don't want to miss any future college application content, make sure you are subscribed with your notifications turned on. As always, if you have any requests, let me know in the comment section below. And until next time, guys, happy writing!